So welcome to another show of It's All About Shipping. This evening with us today, we've got another interesting fireside chat with Mrs. Christine Valentin, who is the Executive Director of World Ocean Council Europe and the founder and CEO of her own consultancy firm, Batzine. Welcome to the show, Christine.
Thank you, Gina.
It's been a well-anticipated show. We had to delay the previous one for some technical issues, but it's a pleasure to have you with us today. And from what I understand, it's also an ideal timing with a lot of interesting new initiatives to discuss today. I'm going to go straight into the first question, because a lot of people have asked me following the Facebook post. When we were discussing, we did a preparatory talk for this show. You mentioned something very interesting, that you look at the ocean, the women and the space and are all the same. You did explain it to me, but I would very much like you to explain that to the audience so we can resolve this quiz today.
Well, Gina, first of all, thank you for inviting me to this fireside chat and to allow me to provide some insight on this comparison, which can sound a bit intriguing and provocative. So let's start with the ocean. When you think about the ocean, what do you see? You see a wide open space, 70% of our planet, limitless, deep, big. Nothing can hurt it. It can absorb everything. Pollution. 93% of the heat coming from our human activities, 25% of the CO2. It will always be there to feed us, to provide more than half the oxygen we breathe. It's resilient. Space, it's far. It can be explored, it's empty. It's like the ocean where we came from. And like the ocean, it's an area of weak governance, and where more and more actors are interested in exploration and exploitation, outer space or the deep seas, but under which conditions? The Wild West or the common good? For many, space and ocean will always be there. Nothing will happen. Whatever we do, they're too big to fail. So women in all this, well, like ocean and space, they're always there. No matter what we do, they're always there to support us, to nurture us. But like the ocean, like space, lack of respect for women will impact sustainable development. If you do not have half of the talent in the world working with you, how do you intend to really grow in a sustainable way? As Peter Thompson, the UN Special Envoy for the Ocean, said, SDG 14 and the health of our planet is substantially less likely to be attained if 50% of the population who can help achieve these goals are ignored. Gender must be embedded in all efforts to protect the ocean and engage with it in a sustainable way. And it's the same for space.
I very much enjoyed your answer the first time that we discussed it, but I think elaborating a bit further for the audience has been even more insightful, and I couldn't agree more, and also surely more relevant than ever before. And hopefully we have already been seeing that these initiatives are being embraced in sustainability, and hopefully we will be seeing more of them going forward. But it's a very, very interesting way of putting the three together. And we are going to be touching upon different parts of your answer further in the show. But before we go on to the rest of the questions, there's also something very interesting that we discussed in our preparatory talk on the space think tank. And since you are giving emphasis on the space, I would also like you to maybe brief us in on the challenges in that respect. What's the mission and vision of this think tank? What exactly basically you are doing with, or you aim to be doing with this initiative?
Okay, so I'll start with a quote from Christa McAuliffe. I don't know if you remember who Christa McAuliffe is. She was the school teacher who died in Space Shuttle Challenge, in the Space Shuttle Challenge catastrophe. what she said is, she's not an engineer. She's not a space person. She said, space is for everybody. It's not just for a few people in science or math or for a select group of astronauts. That's our new frontier out there. And it's everybody's business to know about space. Economic and social vulnerabilities to space hazards, in particular space debris, are growing. And the issue is what cooperation strategies should be developed to address these key challenges of space junk before it's too late. Space debris are already hindering space exploitation. I don't know if you know, but since the start of space age in 1957, about 5,560 rockets were launched. 9,600 satellites have been placed into Earth orbit, of which 5,500 are still in space. And more than 8,800 tons of space objects clutter the Earth orbit. And what are we talking about? We're talking right now of launching new constellations of one constellation, 12,000 more satellites just in one constellation. And we're talking of multiple constellations. So existing regulations are insufficient when it comes to space-related concerns. Standards define the space debris mitigation requirements, but are non-binding. There's a draft from an American Federal Communications Commission on mitigating orbital debris in new space. And it's a recent draft, but you know, the treaties were ratified between 1967 and 1979, and nothing has really happened since. And at the same time, Earth's business is increasingly dependent on space technologies. I mean, I don't think we would be able to have that chat if we didn't have space technologies. The fastest growing sectors in the global economy, it's worth 329 billion in 2016 and estimated to double to around 640 billion by 2030. And what we see is the emergence of what is called new space, which is really a lot of new private sector actors completing the already present military and civil government actors. So major space macro trends that we can see these days are expanded demand from new segments and players, new entrants and business models, reduced cost to serve. And so with all this happening, what we believe is important and what our vision is that responsible and coordinated public and private efforts are essential to clean space and its sustainable exploration, development, and stewardship. And right now, for example, when you look at the private sector, you don't really have a way for them to work together on ensuring that. So the mission of the initiative that I'm going to be launching very soon is to create an international think and do tank advocating for sustainable space governance. It's a collective organization committed to serving the general interest through cooperation, dedicated to informing and influencing the future of space exploration and exploitation. Right now, we still, as I say, it's still a lot the governance, but really the initiative wants to give a voice to the private sector organizations whose sustainable development relies on space exploitation, even when they're not primary spacecraft operators. So the idea is really to guide the decision-making process of companies and public institutions by identifying, formulating, and presenting innovative and appropriate proposals built on collective intelligence and cooperation. This initiative is open to all corporate pioneers who care about space sustainability. And really, when you look at it, I mean, there are things in common with, and I'll talk about it later, the World Ocean Council. Which was, when it was founded originally, it's really this idea of this cross-sectoral private sector working together. And that's really important. It's important for the oceans, but it's also important as the private sector is growing and developing. It's also important to have that also in space. And so this is what the initiative that I'm going to be launching is all about.
It definitely sounds like a much needed initiative at the moment, and a coordinated process in this respect is definitely something necessary going forward that we have to acknowledge. Since this is a new initiative, is there anywhere where could people find further information, or how could they be able to access this in the next?
So right now I'm in the launching phase, and I'm reaching out to corporates, but after we will of course talk about it. But really what's important is to get the corporations and private sector to really be engaged. I've spent all my career in the private sector. I've been in all sorts of corporations, big ones, smaller ones, all private sector. And I really believe that engaging them is really the solution to our future, because they are dynamic, they are innovative, they are creative, they're constantly analyzing risk, looking at opportunities, and most of all, when you look at trying to look at 20 or 30 years in advance, you find more of that in the private sector, simply because for them it's investments, but they have to anticipate on the trends in order to mitigate the risks and find the opportunities. And so I really think it's important to get them engaged, especially in areas where you have weak governance. It was the case in the ocean, but it's also the case in space.
Definitely. And we look forward to hearing more about this in the near future, and more details on how this project will be going. And of course, we wish you the best of luck. As I said, a much needed initiative, and a lot to be done, I would say, in this respect. Interestingly enough, over the past few months, even though this show started the initiative was launched to deal with post-COVID strategy going forward. I didn't start the show with a COVID related question, but I think without doubt we have to address this matter also. So I would like your input on this global crisis of COVID. What has this been on your both personal and business professional activities? Do you feel that priorities and agendas have changed in both respects, or any?
So the COVID period, which started for me, I think in February. My last trip, in fact, was to Athens in Greece, and that was in February. And since I was used to traveling all the time, and now I'm at home, so it's been a time of reflection for me, but also a time to clarify my focus, be more aligned with my passions and interests. I mean, as you've seen, this initiative is a bit the result of that kind of reflection and focusing on something that has been something I've been interested in, but really never launched before for quite a few years. It also, for me, brings an even higher sense of urgency on the importance of respecting our planet in all our actions. I think it's also showed an increased need for leaders who are able to project themselves in the mid and long term and take difficult decisions early on when all the consequences of the evil are not yet visible. So it's what I call the opposite of the firefighter, hero, or the warrior mentality. You need to anticipate and to make the decisions even if people don't see right now what is happening. And in fact, it's those who have reacted in that way which are in a better state today. So I've always been someone who anticipates and work with scenarios. So I really appreciate these skill sets are really put forward as being the ones needed to resolve the present crisis. It's also, I have to say, a sense of awe to see that the entire planet is putting human values in front of the economy, and that this has driven to more collaboration rather than less in places like Europe, for example, when we've seen some of the decisions taken. We're still, I mean, why are we all, I don't know what the situation is in Greece. I mean, in France, we have a curfew starting at 9 again, and in Paris, for example, but really we're doing this because we want to save lives. And when you think about it, I don't know if in history we can see once where the entire world basically decided that saving lives and lives of the elder mainly, or the weaker, is something more important than saving the economy. We also need to be careful about the economy, but it's a clear decision, and I think that's one of the positives, not always seen, but I think it's quite important. And this period has also reinforced me in my role as trying to accelerate the need for ecological and social transition for companies and organizations, and focusing on the need to take in account of gender balance, and we'll talk a bit more of gender later on, and international governance weak areas in their development strategy. So soft skills, you don't always have all the the numbers, or you don't always have the facts, but you need to make decisions and early on anticipate and go forward and stick to them. So I think those are some of the elements of this global crisis and what it has done for me. But it's true, I'd like at one point this crisis to finish, because it would be good to return to some kind of normalcy.
I think for various reasons we all want this crisis to be seeing some light in the tunnel, because as you said, now we're going through a second phase and there's so much uncertainty, unfortunately. But indeed, it is a very positive thought to see, and an action to see that human lives are being put on the forefront in this situation. Within your professional scope, my next question would be at the World Ocean Council, and talking about sustainability. Prior to COVID, what were the word that we were hearing, of course, all the time was IMO 2020, sustainability goals, and working towards greenhouse emission reductions. The IMO as a UN body was also had to be put on hold and had other crises to deal with, like the crew changes, etc. Do you feel, or have you seen this from your role at the World Ocean Council, or on a wider, in a wider context? Has this agenda been put on hold?
Well, I haven't really seen the on hold of the agenda. I have to say that, so for example, with the IMO, the World Ocean Council is engaged in the IMO Jeff UNDP GLOFOLing project. And the fact that there are no in-person meetings has absolutely not slowed things down. The transfer to online meetings and workshops is something that has continued, and the exchanges have taken place in that way. With the World Ocean Council, we're also very engaged around the Arctic in a certain number of EU-funded projects, and basically we went to online. So of course, there's been challenges, but not directly for the World Ocean Council. There's been challenges, for example, in certain research cruises that could not take place, and delays in that. But otherwise, it's been quite interesting, and luckily enough, at least on the projects where I've worked on and where we've worked on, first of all, we're used to already working, being from all kinds of different places and working together very often through video. And we had been able, I think it's important to meet in person before. So when you know the persons before, after, you transfer to maybe working online, and you can be quite efficient, and it creates new links, and we've been able to continue working. And I think I don't think the agenda has really slowed down. There are, of course, so the World Ocean Council, also the CEO would travel all the time and be everywhere at conferences talking. Well, he doesn't travel as much, but there's lots of conferences. So online, there's a lot of activity that is going on. And so I think the environmental agenda has not been put on hold at all for the IMO or for really for anyone. When you look at you know, the EU Green Deal and what is coming, I mean, climate change is here because you've had COVID, but you've had also, unfortunately, other climate change related catastrophes, which show that, you know, we cannot slow down on all of these issues.
Of course, and it's very encouraging to see that this agenda hasn't been put on hold, and it's continuing. In fact, I would agree that we are seeing a lot of activity again resume, maybe for some time with the crew changes.
Yeah.
There were the priorities, but we are seeing a lot of these activities resuming. Do you foresee any changes going forward generally in the World Ocean Council initiatives following this pandemic?
That's a good question, because as you can imagine, the World Ocean Council, the members are corporations, and corporations have been hit. So of course, after you know, it has an impact on their capacity to continue in the funding of World. So we've seen unfortunately our membership in 2020 decrease because of that. However, you know, the need to work cross-sectorally is still very very important, and in a way, not traveling as much probably lowers the carbon footprint of the organization. And you know, one thing that we usually do, we've been doing, and I've been organizing it since 2015, is a big annual conference called the Sustainable Ocean Summit, which really gathers the ocean business community and the stakeholders. And we changed continent. The last one was November 2019 in Paris, in fact. But this year, we still have a Sustainable Ocean Summit. It's a bit different. It's online, so of course we have to adapt. We have to work differently, but it is going to take place. It's going to take place between 9 and 11 of December. So I think that even after, what is going to be interesting is to see how people are going to maybe travel less. Some of these big events, some of these big conferences. So you will have to continue to influence and to work, but you'll have to do it in a different way. And the fact that people maybe don't travel as much in that matter, it can also provide them more time for other types of interactions and online meetings. I know I've had. It's interesting. With some of our members before, I would have never have thought of doing. I didn't even know Zoom before COVID. So, but doing such a meeting, and because there was COVID, so I did, and you know, they were there, and we could carve out 1 hour and have a really good discussion, and a very good exchange, and they ended up you know, renewing and their membership and being excited. So I think it's really going to be a different way of working. So we've seen, you know, also social media, but with this, it's also another aspect of our digitalization in a way. So how we still need, you know, the in-person meetings. That still is important. But it's true that a lot of these, you know, business travels, if you can do a better job at mixing it sometimes with that kind of exchange, it'll be better for everybody and for the planet. So not just for the humans, but also for the planet.
True, and it was definitely a great crash test to see if we could cope, and how creative companies and associations can be in, as you mentioned, finding other solutions and ways of maybe working more efficiently and more constructively. Of course, nothing can compare to the real in-face contact and the conferences, and I think that is something that the industry is missing at the moment greatly. However, there are creative ways to work around things, I believe. So I'm very happy that you share this opinion. You shared this with us. Having talked about how companies, of course, being your members, have suffered, and we have seen a lot of companies in general and within the shipping context suffering through this pandemic, of course. When it comes to female empowerment and diversity targets, we have already seen some indications from research that at this time, difficult times, companies are opting for layoffs and female professionals are more easily targeted. Do you believe that this is the case? And if so, yes, why?
So the why, in a way, is I don't know if it's as much such female professionals, but clearly very often the lowest in the food chain are the women. So they're always the ones who end up suffering and being the most concerned by layoffs and or in times of difficulty. Making a woman very often will not will try to balance also. She will balance also her social life with her professional life, and it's always harder for them. I mean, studies have showed it, and in the end, it's always the ones who suffer the most. I don't know if I think really it happened. It's more. It's not. Once more, it's not that they are targeted as such. Is that because they're very often, when you look at the number of women at the executive level and in their higher levels, there's less. I mean, it's these ones. Probably don't see the phenomenon as much as you see it lower with the impact on the economy. So I think one thing that is important in that case is, for example, women networks, and it's important also that women continue to work and collaborate together. And I'm thinking of network like WISTA, Women's International Shipping and Trading Association, just in case there's still people who don't know what it is. Or I've been also in other types of networks, and it's important also that faced with situations that are more difficult, because they have to deal also with the personal life more, that they are able to continue professionally, because it's important for sustainability. The UN, the FAO, for example, said it's not a shipping example, but when women are given land rights, seeds, technical training, and access to markets, food productivity can rise by more than 20%. And it's always the same thing. If you continue to educate women to make them progress, you will be better off economically as a country or as a company. So it's really a question of not losing on the talent, but realizing that because they are women, they will have a tendency to not always put the professional in front of the personal and the family, for example. I know it's even me. I'm still surprised, and I shouldn't be surprised when, for example, recently I had a call with someone, a young woman, and she was explaining to me that the way they split it is that she works in the morning and the husband takes care of, that was COVID, so everybody was like locked down, and the husband takes care of the two little kids, the afternoon, it's the other. This is still quite unusual. You don't see that still as much as you would wish. And I found that great. And you see, I'm still surprised by it, and I shouldn't be surprised. That should be the way, you know, it should be like that everywhere, and it isn't. So, so it's education is important, networks is important, and demonstration also. When you see that companies that have more women at different levels and at higher levels on the executive level or in boards do much better than companies that are not gender balanced like that. But gender balance, it's both ways. That means that lower in the food chain, you also, it can't be only women, because then that's where the challenge, the problem is.
Exactly, and that's why we see this kind of trends at the moment, unfortunately. Taking a lead from that, and something that you mentioned at the opening of today's show, that this pandemic also highlights how women at leadership dealt with the crisis in a particular way, and they anticipated the risk and the dangers in making the decisions. My next question has to do with exactly that, actually. In that how female leaders such as in New Zealand, Denmark, Finland, Germany, Iceland, etc. Have been cited in several articles as supporting evidence that women have managed this crisis and this pandemic better. Would you agree in this statement? I feel from your opening remarks that you would. So the next question is, how do you assess, evaluate it? What has been done differently, essentially?
So I of course agree with this statement, but I'll give some. I'll give a little bit more information. So first of all, I think it's not just a women versus men issue. You know, it's clear that countries electing women leaders are a sign, at least in democracies, of the capacity of their people to elect the best leaders, irrespective of their gender. So, you know, this shows they're really going after the entire talent pool and not just 50% of it. I'll give another example also. Last year, I spent a few weeks in Hawaii, but it was military security training, I will say. So it wasn't surfing.
Okay.
And it was very interesting because you had lots of military and civilian representatives of the United States and Asia Pacific nations. And some of the workshop outcomes included educating maritime security experts and practitioners on how to successfully reach out to women to ensure a more inclusive leadership talent pool, as well as empowering women in maritime security by exchanging knowledge, best practices, and providing visibility. Why? Because at the outset, gender equality demonstrably contributes to peace building. States with a smaller gender gap have shown a tendency towards durable peace agreements, lower levels of child mortality, greater focus on social welfare, and higher trust in their government. And those are exactly qualities that we need to go when we have a situation like COVID. You know, the superior performance of women during the pandemic, some common features have been found in a research that was done. Resilience, pragmatism, benevolence, trust in collective common sense, mutual aid, and last but not least, humility. And I think that gender balanced environments produce more robust decisions. You know, when I said, I mentioned the firefighter hero mentality, you know, this is absolutely not what works. And that is not what is needed. So those are more, you know, what I mentioned earlier. And so on one side, you know, people say women are more risk averse. Maybe they're more risk averse in certain domain of human life, but more risk taking in the domain of the economy. Policy making produces robust decisions when you have qualities that are normally viewed as, quote, female, such as empathy, compassion, listening, collaboration. I mean, those are qualities of the future, clearly. And they're hugely valuable, not just in a pandemic, but also on issues demanding close international cooperation, such as the climate crisis, environmental pollution, resource use, aging, and skills shortages. So, and I put it in quote, especially because, you know, I think we all, whether we're male or women, we have female, quote, male. And the ratio, it's not because we're a male that we have a higher ratio in male or because we're a female, but we really have to say we need all of them. And it's true that right now, when you look at collaboration, cooperation, listening, empathy, compassion, those are clearly more, quote, female qualities.
Quote, female, as you very correctly mentioned, not only of the future, but also of the present. I mean,
of the present, yes, indeed.
From the way you manage companies to politics, the norm has changed, and you need different skill sets and different traits at present, and of course going forward. And maybe it was one of the positives of that this global crisis brought to the surface for this needs or proof that this is how we should be moving towards sustainability generally as a planet. We mentioned all of this. You very thoroughly explained how, and there is support and evidence, of course, of how diversity generally improves performance and innovation, and it is common sense that it's 50% of the talent pool, and it's just plain facts, basically. However, we do still have an issue of attracting females and youth and talent. If I'm talking in particular to the shipping industry, especially when they're seeing other benefits or maybe more young and vigorous role models in other industries. And this has always been a difficult talent at best of times, and following COVID, maybe even more challenging. So how do you personally believe that we can ensure sustainability in this respect going forward?
So, in general, in many countries, the percentage of women in higher education has increased. And interestingly enough, I don't know if it's the case in your country, but in my country, in France, with the fact that a lot of exams were based on written and not oral, you end up having a much higher level of women than men going into, and it's very, very interesting in all sorts of disciplines. But perceptions must be challenged in order for women to excel at leadership position in ocean industries. So I'll take the example of aquaculture. It's not shipping, but it's another one. You know, one of the biggest barriers, and I think it's the same for shipping, to women's advancement is their own belief that they are meant to be in subservient positions. That's something, I mean, the issue is with men, but it's also with women. The writing of such perceptions require industry leaders to show further acknowledgement of the contributions made by the female workforce and to proactively offer them employment and training opportunities. Sustainability calls on people to step up and do something different and disruptive, and workforce diversity will play a crucial role in facilitating this momentum. Furthermore, you know, as technology advances, operations, and I'll give an example, you know, in ports and terminals, but shipping is the same, will become and is becoming and has already become less physically demanding, thus creating opportunities for women to rise to the challenge. 2 suggestions for improvement. Women leaders should show more appreciation towards fellow female colleagues and encourage them to step up in their career ladders. That's something important. And another one is, you know, you can imagine that NGO and relevant organizations organize training and mentoring program to allow young managers to work with women leaders, learn from them, and build on their efforts. You know, I was visiting recently a shipbuilding. A ship place here in France, and a shipyard, shipbuilding shipyard. And I was asking them, what's the percentage of women that you have in your workers? And they say, well, it's not high enough, but we're working on exoskeletons and things like that. And it'll be easier for them. And I said, well, yeah, but exoskeleton is good for women, but it's good for men also, because then they also have less problems. So, and then after that shipyard, interestingly enough, I visited, it's not new space, but it's offshore wind. And they were building and assembling probably the biggest offshore wind windmills that are going to be installed very soon. And there, I was with quite a group of people, but then suddenly I look around and I see quite a lot of women. 40%. Why? Because it's assembly, it's precision, it's not heavy work, but it's important. It's you have lots of women, and I'm talking of women on the this is industry, okay? This is so not in the offices, but really working there, because it's been adapted and it's good for the men and it's good for women. So so this is how things can change. But interestingly enough, I was in a big group and I was the only one to realize it. I was saying, do you see all these women? And they were under the hard hats. And I said, no. I said, look, there's a lot. And that's how, when I asked the question, I realized there were 40%. So, this is, there's internally on education, training, mentoring, setting examples, but also, it's interesting that you have on one side shipbuilding, which is quite an old industry, on the other, building windmills, and you see, offshore windmills, and you see that there's quite a lot of difference, and taking into account the difference in the capacity for women to be everywhere. And so finally, I would just say that the increased engagement of women from all backgrounds, it brings diversity to the workforce, especially during present times when rapid developments require constant changes in how the work is done and how companies are organized.
Definitely. No, I fully agree. And that was a lovely example, actually, and very interesting to see. I think when you opened your answer with a very important key message, in that it also does have to do in the way that we deal with the way going forward.
Yes.
I can't recall exactly, but there was a quote that Janissa Ardern said with her re-election, saying that I grew up never feeling that I was restricted because I was female. I don't exactly remember it, but I think that's a route of where we need to be starting, but it is very encouraging to.
And I'm sure, your generation is probably even better. My generation, I say all this, but I was not educated in that way. And it's later on that I realized that I had built in certain ways of just being and doing things, and I didn't realize it. And it's not because I'm a woman, it's society, and it's a certain social pressure, and it's so inside you don't, it's difficult for you to even realize it, because it's so part of you that you don't realize that you have that way sometimes.
Exactly. And actually sometimes, especially if it's not in your direct circle, it takes you longer to realize how deeply embedded these are in you. And even in my generation, you do see it. So as you mentioned earlier, what has been a great step in changing these perceptions, I believe, are these networks and those females out there who decided they had to put together an association like WISTA or respective associations, so you see that it's possible, and the more that you see it, the more it changes subconsciously your perception, I believe. So they're definitely very important female networks in this respect. Having covered quite a few aspects on this show, from space to diversity, female leaders, and attracting them to the industry, sustainability, and how the pandemic has affected us. Following the impact of COVID in particular, do you feel that there's a need in policy reform, and what strategies, because I know you have worked heavily with the private sector, you have been working with the private sector, for many years. What strategies can the sector, whether it's a private stakeholder or associations, etc., apply to ensure sustainability on both an environmental and societal pillar from now and going forward?
So first of all, I think it's important to keep the pressure on ensuring gender equality everywhere in future work. I mean, the question needs to be present. It needs to be considered as something that needs to be always looked at and measured and not put to the side. I'd like to also mention some work that was done by the World Economic Forum and lessons from the COVID frontline on gender. You need to apply best practices and a gender lens to all COVID-related efforts. You need always be careful about the gender lens. You need to leverage smart data to inform and shape policies and investment. Engage women through partnerships, funding, leadership positions. Protect women on the front lines of the COVID-19. Safeguard maternal, sexual, and reproductive health. Prioritize gender equality in health systems. Uphold services that tackle gender-based violence. Maintain access to education. Protect women's economic opportunities and challenge gender norms in domestic duties and care work. That's something in the COVID that needs to always be there. So I think that companies that are charging ahead right now are those that value gender balance and encourage risk-taking from their workforce. On the other hand, companies that adhere to traditions due to fears of low profits and regulations become a self-fulfilling prophecy. So there's really a need to look at gender as something to reduce gender balance, to reduce risks. It's crucial that ocean industries provide an environment where their players can make bold decisions and developing technology, but always keeping that ensuring that they will push for change that will lead to better outcomes for future generations. And when you look at future generations, you cannot look only at future male generations. So you always need to have that gender lens when you look at even technology developments. Really, what I would say also is when you look at what's happening with our because we're more into the maritime sector and what's happening with oceans, women there are still impacted by the consequences on climate change and on the changes with the oceans, the rising seas and everything. And so everything has been crafted without taking in when things like even decisions and investment solutions, decisions and investment solutions do not consider gender, the metrics that are used are not correct. And so we really need to look at even when we invest to ensure whether you're an investor, when you invest, that you take in account these gender measures. I'll just on companies, a study of 22,000 publicly traded companies found that an increase in leadership positions for women from 0 to 30% was associated with an increase of 15% in profitability. In that, so you want to succeed, you want to be successful as in your corporation. You need to have women at all levels, and especially in the executive and leadership levels. Furthermore, we have to look also at the fact that women are also influencing more wealth with decision-making control over 30% of investable assets and 27% of global GDP. It reminds me, that's something that we don't always know. It reminds me, I think in France at one point, I don't know if you know, but cars were always designed by men. They were not. So in fact, somebody one day, apparently in one of the car companies, discovered that who was making the decision on the choice, it was the woman. And they started thinking a bit about that, and it really changed and improved. So you have to, it's not just also on the leadership, it's also because they are also there and they will influence the decisions that are taken. So you need to look at how they think and how they want things. So even, you know, we usually look at the finance and investment, and with all the changes that are happening in the maritime world, in a lot of these worlds, finance also needs to play a very important role in how they do their investments. They're starting to look more and more at climate change, at how companies are taking that in account. For example, biodiversity and others, but the gender lens is also quite crucial. And as for a company, if this is looked at, then they will do what's needed to ensure, if they still hadn't understood that it was good for them, that it will be done, so that they can have their financing and their investors.
I think that's definitely a clear message there to companies and towards stakeholders, and evidence. And there has been supporting evidence based on also what the statistics that you mentioned, and of course what we have seen through this pandemic, that this is necessary. This is the only way going forward. And especially as you also explained, emphasis throughout this pandemic was given to the human element. So it's the people that is the most important aspect of every company and every enterprise and association. So you cannot exclude 50% of that element. It goes without saying, I believe. And it's unfortunately in the way that we still have to be discussing these issues, but hopefully we will be seeing positive and encouraging notes going forward. One final question, since time allows, this is a bit out of the agenda, but I was thinking from your experience in the consultancy side, what was the greatest concern of companies throughout this, in dealing with this pandemic?
I think, well, you also have a variation of companies, but it's really, so first of all, you know, usually companies, you like to have like a stable environment. So in order to even do your risk analysis and identify opportunities, I think one of the challenges is all the instability, and in figuring out, you know, what is going to happen next. It's out of the classic risk and opportunity analysis. It sort of fell on everyone, and it's something that wasn't really, I think, anticipated. So I think that's one of the challenges. Then after, I would say that, you know, it depends also where the companies are when they're probably in countries, or look in Europe. I mean, Europe is doing a lot to try and preserve the jobs, and to preserve and to help the different companies. In others, it's much more complicated. So. But and you look at what's happening in the U.S., which is a much more violent, in a way, surrounding an environment where basically you have companies there that have existed for centuries and are suddenly, you know, basically disappearing very, very quickly in the retail world, for example. At the same time, you know, something else will happen after. But I think it's that challenge in analyzing this new risk and figuring out, you know, when it is going to be over, and what really return to, in a way, some kind of normalcy is going to be, which is quite difficult for companies.
Definitely, and well understood and anticipated, I would say. But I was quite interesting. It was quite interesting to find out from your perspective. I think what the coherent and the only clear message that we can be sending out following today's discussion is that definitely the space, the ocean, and the women are the way going forward when it comes to sustainability. Whether we're talking about governments or companies, definitely that is the correct strategy. So with that question, we're coming towards the end of the show. If there's anything else that you would like to share on your initiatives, we are of course looking forward to hosting you a few months maybe down the line when you can share more details.
Sure, especially as shipping is using more and more what comes from space. Mm-hmm. So who knows? Among some of those founding members of the initiative, there may be companies also from the shipping world as end users, or as we're seeing more and more autonomous ships, or the development of drones, and underwater cables are not sufficient, so we need to also have more in space. So that could be there's really quite a lot of links between both, and the final, in a way, if there was a final world, it's really it's respect. You have to respect the environment you're in, the ocean. And for that, you need to know it. So data collection, also observations, space you have to respect, and never think that anything is too big to fail, or that resilience is by nature, because that simply doesn't work. So.
No, exactly. And definitely developing synergies in this respect is the only way that you can develop efficient strategies, and as you mentioned, resilience and respect between each element. So we would be very interested to hear more once you're able to share, of course.
Okay. Yeah.
Anything else you would like to add before closing today's show?
No, really, thank you for giving me this this opportunity, and I think what you're doing is great. All these fireside chats, and keeping this exchange. And did you start that before the COVID already? I don't know about you. Yeah. The fireside chat. Yeah.
Well, the show has been running for 4+ years, but it was a radio show. But after COVID, we evolved digitally online. So
there. Well, I think it's fantastic, and I hope it continues, because it's really important, and lots of women need to be able to become more visible, because that's also what's important, and it's good to give visibility to women.
Exactly. It comes back to what we were discussing throughout the show, that we need to be putting the messages out there and the inspiration out there, and generally raising the profile of women in the industry and the industry in general, I feel personally. So thank you very much, Christine, for being with us this evening. It was a lovely chat with a lot of interesting information, and we really look forward to your initiatives and the further details, because I think space is something that we can embrace within this industry. Mm-hmm. So thank you very much for being with us and for accepting this invitation.
Thank you.
And I look forward to our next fireside chat, and good luck with your think tank. I'm sure it's going to be a great success, and definitely what the private industry needs, a push in going in creating a voice for them in this respect.
Okay.
Thank you very much once again. That was us from It's All About Shipping and Gina Panayiotou. Stay tuned. We'll be announcing our next guest soon on our social media platforms. Have a nice evening.